In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King attends the launch of the Democratic Empowerment Program, an action-oriented initiative targeting the youth innovation and talents across the kingdom. The Prime Minister says municipal elections on the 27th of August is a democratic milestone that will have a political impact on the kingdom and cautions against violations. And citing election law flaws, Egypt's top court rules that Parliament's upper house is illegal but could stay on until elections. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King led a ceremony to launch the Democratic Empowerment Program at the Royal Cultural Center in the presence of the Prime Minister and senior officials, members of the diplomatic corps, and representatives of civil society institutions. The program is a youth-based action-oriented initiative that will be streamlined in all governorates. Farah Ajlouni has the story.
Under the umbrella of the King Abdullah Fund for Development, the program aims to promote the values of dialogue, accountability, tolerance, and pluralism, all of which constitute the foundations of development, and to encourage the youth to renounce violence. It also aims to encourage volunteerism and innovation through enhancing the role of civil society institutions across all governorates. In remarks at the ceremony, Chairman of the King Abdullah Fund, Omar Razzaz, echoed His Majesty's belief that the only path towards a brighter future for Jordan is political and economic empowerment of citizens to enable them to enjoy their full rights and to fulfill their national duties. With a vision to involve all segments of society, namely the youth, in building a modern democratic culture streamlined across the country's democratic institutions, the program seeks to bring about needed change and contribute to national development.
وقد تم تحديد 3 محاور أساسية.
3 basic pillars for joint action were defined to translate these values and concepts into actions and programs. The first is the launch of dialogue and volunteerism clubs at school and university levels across the kingdom. The second is the implementation of programs to enhance accountability, transparency, and the right to access information. And the third involves programs that promote and support talents and innovation in the service of local communities.
The ceremony included a theater performance that echoed public concerns, including calls for comprehensive reforms, a serious fight against corruption, among other national grievances such as rising prices of commodities, presented in a humorous fashion that entertained the audience. The ceremony ended with the recital of the Youth Empowerment Declaration by a group of young men and women, which reinforces His Majesty's vision that youth energy and initiatives are the real instruments of change. In their declaration, the youth pledged to seek the truth, to dispel rumors, to respect others' views, to commit to constructive dialogue, and to accept other people's differences. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
The launch of the Democratic Empowerment Program followed the 4th in a series of discussion papers His Majesty had authored on the country's political transformations and was published today in the local press. His Majesty hopes through the discussion papers to simulate political debate and lay out his vision for the future of the country's democracy. His Majesty stated that the essential goal of Jordan's reform process is to enhance citizens' participation in decision-making, and this can be achieved through successive parliamentary cycles. He went on that a key requirement is the country's democratization efforts is to enhance the role of civil society in monitoring and improving the political performance of all institutions. His Majesty also tackled political participation and active citizenship and the tools that the people need for active citizenship that can guide the way for Jordan's future. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said municipal elections will be held on August 27th and will be a democratic milestone that will have a political impact on the kingdom. In a meeting with electoral officials, heads of municipal committees, members of the Independent Elections Commission and local governors, Mansour said holding the local polls just months after parliamentary election marks an expansion of the electoral process. Speaking on the day the Department of Civil Status and Passports sent initial voters list to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and other stakeholders, Nsour urged against chaos, violations, or attempts to sabotage the elections. Lashing out at calls for boycotting the election, the Prime Minister described such views as a political error, urging all Jordanians to turn out and have a say at the ballot box. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh, on a visit to Ramallah, met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to discuss Jordanian diplomacy aimed at the resumption of Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. Joudeh conveyed to Abbas His Majesty the King's greetings and reiterated Jordan's support to Palestinians until they establish an independent state. The meeting also dealt with U.S. efforts to revive serious, effective, and timelined peace talks leading to a two-state solution. Abbas lauded Jordan's role to breathe new life into negotiations and the kingdom's continued political and humanitarian support to Palestinians. Joudeh later held a joint news conference with his Palestinian counterpart Riyad al-Maliki, who said King Abdullah and Abbas are in full harmony on all issues and keenly pursuing consultations. We stay in Ramallah, where the Palestinian president has named a new prime minister to replace economist Salam Fayyad, who quit in April and formally leaves office this month. A Palestinian official said Abbas had asked Rami Hamdallah, a political independent and university president, to form a new cabinet. In Syria, Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim told UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that Syria will allow the Red Cross to enter the town of Qusayr after the military operations are over. His comments came after UN humanitarian officials called for an immediate ceasefire in Qusayr to enable aid to civilians trapped in the town. Qusayr has become a flashpoint where President Bashar al-Assad's forces and Hezbollah fighters are battling to drive out rebels. Lu'ay Balqar has more.
Syrian government forces continue their offensive to capture the key town of Qusayr. Rebels took up several positions around the checkpoint, and they have been on the move constantly, searching to exploit any weakness in the perimeter of President Bashar al-Assad's forces. In a recent advance, the Syrian forces have captured the northern district of Qusayr, leaving civilians little chance to escape. 15 rebel fighters are reported to have been killed in an overnight clash with Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon's eastern border with Syria. A senior Free Syrian Army commander and head of the Revolutionary Military Council visited the town and vowed to bring men and supplies to the besieged town, increasingly becoming a flashpoint in Syria's civil war. In a spillover to neighboring Lebanon, shelling has turned the city of Hermel at the country's eastern border into a ghost town, with the most of the city's 150,000 residents fleeing their homes. The city's schools closed, and some residents have stayed behind to continue working, but others have abandoned everything to have, including their homes and jobs. France says its intelligence services believe 3,000 to 4,000 fighters from Lebanon's Hezbollah are fighting alongside the Syrian regime in the civil war, and called for an urgent resolution to the conflict, adding that the possibility of it spilling across the borders into neighboring countries makes a resolution even more urgent.
This is why it is necessary to be quick with this resolution, because any wait-and-see attitude could create disturbances in neighboring countries. That would create enormous disturbances for the future and for the global Middle Eastern map.
And as Western countries press for a peace conference on Syria, French President François Hollande said it's unacceptable for Russia to discuss arming the Syrian government ahead of the conference, and emphasized the importance of his own and his allies' threat to arm the rebels. His French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius is suggesting that the peace conference could take place in July. The United States, Russia and others have been pressing for the conference to take place this month, but details of how it could be organized have yet to be agreed, and there is still no firm agreement on the date. Lu'ay Balqar for the news at 10.
Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Francis appealed for the release of those who have been kidnapped in Syria, including 2 bishops among the victims of a spree of abductions. 2 Syrian Orthodox bishops were kidnapped last month and are still missing. With an uprising turned insurgency raging for more than 2 years, kidnappings by both rebel and government militia are rampant and often target foreigners and members of the country's business community. At the end of his Sunday address, the Pope called for a minute of silent prayer among the large crowd for soldiers and peacekeepers killed in various conflicts around the world.
Fratelli e sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, I always carry within me and I'm pained with the concern over the enduring conflict which for more than 2 years inflames Syria, and which especially hurts the civilian populations who aspire to live in peace, justice and understanding. This tormented situation of war brings with it tragic consequences, death, destruction, major economic and environmental damage, as well as the plague of kidnappings. In deploring these facts, I wish to assure you of my prayer and my solidarity for the kidnapped people and their families. And I appeal to the humanity of the kidnappers to free their victims. Let's pray for our beloved Syria.
After we come back, heavy torrential rain in Central Europe causes widespread flooding and landslides, forcing governments to evacuate some areas. Egypt's top court ruled that Parliament's upper house was illegal but could stay on until elections. The court cited election law flaws as the reason for finding the upper house to be illegal, but said implementation of the ruling should wait given the legislative role of the chamber by the new constitution. It also ruled as illegal the rules that led to the selection of the assembly that drafted the new constitution, but it said that it did not affect its legitimacy since it was approved by the people. Analysts said the ruling seemed likely to irritate both sides in Egypt's political conflict, as Islamists would be angry that the chamber's legitimacy had been rejected, while the opposition would be disappointed that the house was not dissolved. Over to Turkey, trouble flared once again as tens of thousands of demonstrators regrouped in Istanbul and Ankara after a brief lull. The tearing up of trees at a park in Taksim Square triggered Turkey's fiercest anti-government unrest in years. Police used tear gas on protesters, but the clashes were relatively minor compared with major violence in Turkey's biggest cities during the past 2 days. The tense atmosphere was filled with chanting for Erdogan's resignation and anti-government slogans. Heavy rainfall in Central Europe is flooding rivers and lakes, forcing governments to evacuate some areas. Emergency procedures have been underway, including limiting road traffic, closing underground metros, and putting up flood barriers. Zain Abu Soufe has the story.
In the southern German city of Heidelberg, streets were overflowing with River Neckar's water. According to the German Federal Administration for Water and Shipping, the Neckar River was 5 meters high this afternoon, almost double the normal level.
This will be the worst flooding I have ever seen. The worst ever was in 1993. That was more than 6 meters. And we are still expecting a further 30 centimeters, which is why we are putting down the sandbags.
Some small German towns have been evacuated in the eastern state of Saxony and northern Bavaria. Flooding and landslides across Austria also forced hundreds of people to evacuate their homes. At least 1 person died and 2 were missing in the deluge, which in some places dumped up to 2 months' worth of rain in just a few days. Elsewhere, Prague's mayor announced possible plans to evacuate the city's residents as the Vltava River rising levels threaten some districts in the Czech Republic. A hospital near the river was already evacuated.
All the elements of the integrated emergency system are on duty. We, together with the Czech government, called on the army, of the Czech Republic to help, and rescue volunteer teams are working now at the scene.
Floods have already hit the west and the northwest of Czech Republic, so far claiming 1 victim. Zain Abu Sufa for the news at 10.
Yamaha's MotoGP world champion Jorge Lorenzo won the Italian Grand Prix for the 3rd year in a row, while teammate Valentino Rossi crashed on the opening lap. Lorenzo won comfortably from Honda's championship leader and fellow Spaniard Dani Pedrosa, whose rookie teammate Marc Marquez crashed with 2 laps to go shortly after he had moved into 2nd place. The crash allowed Britain's Cal Crutchlow to take 3rd place for the Yamaha team. We continue with the world of speed. Finland's Jari-Matti Latvala won the Acropolis rally for his first victory in the World Championship since he joined Volkswagen at the end of last season. Spain's Dani Sordo was 2nd for Citroën, with Belgian Thierry Neuville 3rd in a Ford. Latvala finished the 3-day, 306-kilometer race 1 minute 50 seconds ahead of Sordo. In the overall standings, Latvala leapfrogged Sebastian Loeb into 2nd place. Loeb, the 9-time world champion and last year's Acropolis winner, opted to sit out this year's edition, but is still only 6 points adrift of Latvala in 3rd place. And finally, for a quick look at the weather, normal summer conditions continue tonight and tomorrow, with relatively hot weather in most regions and northwesterly light to moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba, however, should expect quite hot weather tomorrow, with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King attends the launch of the Democratic Empowerment Program, an action-oriented initiative targeting the youth's innovation and talents across the kingdom. The Prime Minister says municipal elections on the 27th of August is a democratic milestone that will have a political impact on the kingdom, and cautions against violations. And citing election law flaws, Egypt's top court rules that Parliament's upper house is illegal but could stay on until elections. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.